So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what a professor actually does. So I think a lot of people think that a professor's main job is to teach, but that's not really the case. And then, of course, research, but in reality, the professor isn't actually the one who's doing the research. So what does a professor actually do? So when I say a professor doesn't do research, so then I mean they don't actually go in the lab and do the research tasks that needs to be done. Like, they're not actively engaged in collecting data, at least not in physical sciences where you go in the lab and you do stuff. The people who do that are master students, PhD students, and postdocs. So then you might think, okay, so the professor is the ones who write the papers once all the data has been collected. But that's not really the case either. The vast majority of the paper is written by whoever actually collected the data or did the research. Went in the lab, did whatever they needed to do. Actually, I would say the person who collected the data will do 90% of the writing as well. And then the professor will do like 5%, and then the rest of the authors will do like the remaining 5%. So the actual job of a professor in the research context is to obtain funding. So the main job of the professor is to come up with ideas and write grant applications to fund PhD students and postdocs who will do the actual work. And when a professor actually obtains a grant, the university he works at will get part of that grant. And so if a professor obtains a lot of grant funding, what the university pays the professor is actually less than what the professor brings in. So it actually makes the university money, which incentivizes the university to keep employing them. So the other important aspect of their jobs, in terms of their careers, is to produce research papers that get citations as corresponding author. So when I say students, their students does most of the work. Whoever did all that work and wrote the paper becomes first author on that paper, whilst the professor who got the funding and came up with the idea goes as last author, at least in chemistry. That's how it is. Or corresponding author, which means that they're the author of the paper that the publisher corresponds with during the publishing process. And so the two, like getting funding and publishing papers that get citations, are very closely related. That's why I would say they're equally important. So when a funding body sees that a professor produces a lot of papers that gets a lot of citations, they see, oh, this professor does a lot of work that gets a lot of attention and is actually quite useful. We should, so therefore he does a lot of good with the money that we provide him, so we should give him more money in the future. So that's how it works. So you get funding, you hire people to do the research, you publish papers, which leads you to get more money. And that's basically the cycle, how the cycle works. And that's the most important thing for a professor. That's what progresses their career. That's what gives them a more credibility as a professor and gives them more status as a professor. So that's the actual job of a professor, in my opinion. The second most important part of their job is to do basically odd jobs for the university. So like being on committees, like hiring committees and acceptance committees of students, inviting and hosting professors who give talks at their university, and, going and sitting in on random meetings. And then there's teaching. And I would argue that teaching is probably the lowest priority on their list. Like, the university doesn't care how good the teaching is. They don't actually care too much about the quality. Nobody's sitting in on a professor and observes how they're teaching. And it doesn't matter, really, how much they prepare or not. And You know, the only thing they might look at is grades, but then the professor is the one who decides what the grades are, so, you know, he can just skewer the grades whichever way he wants to or needs to. The university just needs someone who actually does the teaching, and nobody really cares if it's good or not. It's just a matter of someone needs to do it. And, you know, the university would like to have a reputable professor to teach the students, because that draws in more students. But in reality, that reputation is purely based on their citations, on their published papers. And it doesn't really have anything to do with their quality of teaching. And so if you're taking a class and you can choose between a professor and a lecturer whose actual job it is to teach, and you know nothing else about them, you should always choose the lecturer, because their job is to teach. And so you're much more likely to get a quality teacher in a lecturer than a professor. So in summary, the two most important parts of a professor's job is to get funding and manage students or researchers. And the funny thing is that when a university hires a professor, there is no selection on management skills. And there is no training. There's very little training for professors also with the management skills. And so it could be improved so dramatically if they just had better management skills. And so it's quite a strange setup in academia. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. And if you want to watch one of my other videos, they're all there. But that's it for now. And I'll see you in the next one.